I've just discovered another reason why I love home church. Feed your soul. Are you kidding me? What an exciting place to be. Enrollment Sunday's next Sunday. I'm going to have to either find a way to get here or to send something by email because that one that Pastor Jim talked about, the Heidelberg Catechism, wow. There are great things going on here, ladies and gentlemen. I talked to someone this morning, and she said, I've been away for a while, and I'm back at home church. And we just talked a little bit about that journey, and I'm glad you're all here. I love being here. I've been thinking a great deal about mystery in December. And I thought I would talk about mystery today. And this candle, we all know what a candle is made of, the wax, the wick. With a flame, it needs oxygen to combust. But beyond the parts that make up the whole, there is absolute mystery in light. The fact that that little flame can send light and allow us to see in this huge space, maybe not see well, but the movement of that light, whether it's as a particle or as a wave, that's still up for grabs in the world of physicists. But the mystery of light, how in fact does it work and move and give us life? And this morning, as we talk about the incarnation, God becoming flesh, I want you to think about this simple candle. And not how it works, but how it changes the way we perceive. Changes a room, gives warmth, gives heat. Don't try and figure it out. Just accept its beauty and its warmth and its simplicity. John chapter 1. You can turn the lights back on there. John chapter 1 begins, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him is life, and that life gives light to all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it." And then we jump down to verse 14 in John chapter 1, and it says, "The Word became flesh and made its dwelling amongst us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who comes from the Father, full of grace and truth." Now, I know way back, I don't even know, 6, 7, 8 months ago, you began the journey in the book of John, seeing the sun, looking into the sun or the sunlight, using that metaphor. But I want to revisit chapter 1 because I want to talk about who Jesus is this morning. And historically, in the church, and when we celebrate the Lord's Supper, communion, the Eucharist in a little while, the nature of Jesus has been twofold. Water, to represent his humanity, and the fruit of the vine, grape juice, wine, whatever it may be, to represent his divinity. And that mystery of those two perfectly blended together is what I want to look at this morning. And to understand John chapter 1 and the verses that I just spoke, we need to understand language. We need to understand words. And we all know how significant words are. And some words are absolutely loaded. And John chapter 1 is no different. If I throw out the word crazy, you think of some event, maybe some person that you would attribute crazy to, or something you've seen on the news or television. It's a loaded word. Everyone would bring a different story or a different example. Or if I came up to you afterwards and said, "You're a really intense person," you might take that as a compliment, or you might take that as, "I'm intense? I don't want to be that kind of a person." It's a loaded term. Those words are everywhere in our language. About 9 years ago, I was sitting at the dinner table with all of my children around, and we just started to eat, and the phone rang. And I said, just leave it. If it's really important, they'll go away, they'll call back later. And it just kept ringing, and everyone just stopped and looked at me, and they waited. What are you going to do, Dad? So I got up and answered it, and it was the Vancouver Sun. Again! Probably the fourth time they'd called me in 2 months, and every time my answer was the same, no. So as they're doing their spiel, I'm thinking, how can I make this end once and for all? So when they get to the end of, do I want a subscription, and this is how much it costs, and this is how it can change your life, in my sinful, broken humanness, I threw out one loaded word. I'm blind. As soon as they heard that word, the conversation completely changed. I didn't have to say anything. I just listened to apologies for the next 45 seconds. And then at the end of that apology, they said, "Sir, would you like us to take you off our call list?" And I was like, yes! I was doing a little dance with the phone, and my kids are watching me wondering what great news I had just received. One word changed everything. I never heard from them again. Sure, I felt guilty. I didn't tell my children what I'd done. My son Ben is here this morning. He's heard it. Words are powerful. And in John chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, we hear 3 powerful words about who Jesus is. The divinity of Jesus. We hear that he is light. We hear that he is life, and we hear that he is the Word. And all of those describe his divinity, his eternal nature. And I want to talk about those 3 words for just a moment, and this is probably a little bit of a review. If you can think way back. Pastor Jim, how long ago did you do chapter 1?
It's been 1 year and 7 months.
Yeah.
Wow. Really? Because I remember when we started that. I was here near the beginning. The word logos, if you remember that word, in the beginning was the logos. The Greek word that's used means not just word on a written page, but the idea of thought, reason, rational, order. In the beginning, there was order. In the beginning, there was purpose. And when that claim is made about Jesus, we get a much, much deeper understanding of his divinity. He was there at the beginning. And I want to suggest this morning that there are all kinds of connections between John chapter 1 and the first 2 chapters of Genesis. And if you think back to the beginning of Genesis, where it talks, in the beginning the earth was formless and void, and the Spirit hovered over the waters. In the beginning, there was a need for purpose and for order. We understand the importance of order, especially with language, with words. You have all written an email or a text or a letter, and then someone responds to you and says, "What in the world are you talking about?" And you've left out a word, or you've misspelled a word, or you've put the wrong word in, and it completely changed the message. Or maybe you've received one. Maybe you know someone that when they send you an email, it sounds as if they're having a conversation with their kids as they're writing it. Like it's just all disjointed and disconnected. Or in a text, people are putting in smiley faces and icons and letters that represent words, and you have to kind of decipher. And sometimes it just doesn't come out right. We know how important the idea of order is when it comes to defining and understanding purpose. The second word is life. In the Greek, it's zoe. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Beginnings matter. when it comes to life. My daughter was sitting at the table the other night, Grace. She's almost 16, and she's already the perfect parent. And she tells us that quite often. My older daughter, Allie, regularly says, "Do I have to be the parent again in this situation?" As I deal with one of my boys or something. My daughters are perfect parents already. And my daughter Grace said just a couple weeks ago, it would be perfect if I could just stay 16 when I was a parent, because then I'd know exactly what my kids need. Because I would understand them perfectly, because I'm closer to their age, and I wouldn't be old like you and have no idea what it's like to be a 16-year-old, and I would just be that much better a parent. And of course, I laughed out loud at her, and I can't even remember if I responded. It was just so bizarre. But I said to her, "Grace, imagine what you would miss. Imagine what you wouldn't understand about the beginning of life and having children if you were a parent at 16. You wouldn't see things as clearly. You wouldn't have those life experiences, that maturity to understand the significance of life and the beginning of life." And anybody here adopted children? Anybody here have an adopted child? No one? A family at my church, Legacy Church in Surrey, they've adopted 4 girls, and I had a conversation with them. And I said, what was it like to adopt? Because they adopted their kids when they were 4 and 5 years old. And they did 4 in a row, boom, boom, boom. Within 3 years, they adopted 4 girls all around the age of between 4 and 6. And I said, what was it like to get not a baby, but a child that was 5 years old? And they said it was fine. Because we went back and we read all about them. And we asked them questions. And we found out about their health and where they'd come from and what they liked. And we saw pictures of them. And I said, what would have happened if you didn't have those first 5 years? And they said, they wouldn't have felt like ours. They needed to know as much as they could about the beginning of their lives to truly understand. Life, beginning. So important. And in John chapter 1, it says, Jesus was there at the beginning. So for us to understand and look into his nature, his divinity, to know that he was there at the beginning is really, really important. And then finally, the last one, light. He is the light to all of humanity. The Greek word phos. Say that with me. Phos. Light, we are creatures of light. Think about light in your life. Most of the time, it's a light switch. That's about all we do with light, or headlights that go on to help us see. But think of light. Warmth, giving life to plants, photosynthesis, the radiation we get from the sun that gives us X-rays and gamma rays and radio waves and ultraviolet and infrared to turn on our TV. All of that energy that comes from that single light source. We are creatures of light. We really are. We are constantly looking for ways to control light, to find new sources of light. We orient our entire lives around light. Seasons, sleeping patterns, curtains, blinds, spotlights, Christmas lights. Light is who we are. And so to hear in John chapter 1 that he is light in the darkness. And then to go back to Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning God created light. Elohim, the Hebrew word for the creator God. He said, let there be light. Those were the first things that came out of the Creator's mouth. And we see John describing Jesus in the very same way. Life, the Word, and light tell us about the divinity of Jesus. Why does that matter? That he is fully divine? It matters because creation was all about Jesus coming to fulfill it. He was always the plan. Right from the beginning, he was going to come and represent the Father. How that works, that mystery, how does that candle spread light through this room? He was always the plan. Even if Adam and Eve had not disobeyed, even if sin had not entered into the world, Jesus was always coming to earth and bringing that divine nature. Well, we jump down to verse 14, and John gives us a very different perspective. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. There's some really interesting words in that chapter. And the first one is flesh. It comes from a Greek word called sarx, which means literally muscle, bone, physical, almost animal-like, just the simplicity of what our bodies are made of. And we see that in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, where it says, God made man from the dust of the ground. And in the Hebrew, the word ground or soil is Adama. So you've got a bit of a play on words. The first man is called Adam. In Hebrew, Adama means soil or dust or ground. We come from the earth. And you and I, our bodies, mostly water, hydrogen and oxygen. We've got some nitrogen and some carbon in us and some other trace elements. We're pretty simple creatures, chemically speaking. We too will die, and our bodies will return to the ground, and they will decompose, and those nutrients will go back and bring new life. We come from the dust. We understand what flesh is. I am an expert on delivering babies. And the reason I'm an expert is because I have seen 3 of my 4 children removed from their mother's body through a cesarean section. And by the time I got to the last one, my son Benjamin, I was very, very courageous, because up until that point, you're in the room and there's weird stuff going on. I mean, it's just, everyone's calm, and you're looking around and you're just like, do they really know what they're doing here? Because it's just so relaxed. And stuff's happening, things are leaking, stuff's getting cut, and you're just like, what's going on? But by the 4th one, I felt pretty confident in the operating room. And my wife laying on a bed with the little, Babette, what's it called, the little curtain shield? Is there a good name for that? The curtain. So it's going right across her chest, and so her head's right here, and her belly's right here. And the first couple times I hadn't been very gutsy, and I just kind of sat down and held my wife's hand and tried to be the good husband. But I told her on the last one with my son Benjamin, I'm standing up, I'm watching everything, I'm asking questions, I might even walk around. And so I'm standing there, the curtain right in front of me, and I watch them with the little laser, zzz, zzz, and they're just cutting that little incision in her abdomen, and I'm like, are you feeling that? Nope, it's all good. And so I'd kind of stand to this side of the curtain, just kind of leave her, and I'd watch, and they finished up, and they cut through all the layers of skin and muscle and fat, and finally got there, and then eventually the water breaks, and I won't get into all the graphic details about fluids, but it was pretty awesome. And then they bring this instrument, and I'm not making this up, okay? This is the real deal. They bring a garden hoe that has been dipped in stainless steel liquid, and then they've cut off the handle. That's exactly what it looks like. It looks like the end of a garden hoe without the wooden handle. And I'm like, what is going on with that? And so they come up, and they insert that garden hoe into that incision. And I go back over here to Cynthia's head. Do you feel that garden hoe in your belly? No, it's good. All right, I'll be right back. So I come over here, and they take that garden hoe, and they just give it a little tug so that that incision goes like this and opens up. And they just leave it there. It's sitting on her belly. There's a hole in her stomach. And I'm like, what is going to happen next? So the doctor comes over and puts his hands like this. And they go into the opening and disappear. So I come back over to Cynthia and I'm like, he's got his hands inside of your belly. Do you feel anything? She goes, I felt a little tug. Okay, I'll be right back. So I come over here to this side and they start pulling. And suddenly, my son Benjamin, his head is sitting right there. Just the head is sitting on her belly. And it was so surreal because I'm looking at Cynthia's head and I'm looking at my son's head, and you can't reconcile what you're seeing. You think you're looking at two different bodies because it's separated with this curtain, and you just got to keep looking back and forth to really believe what you're seeing. The hands go back in past the head, grab the shoulders, and my son Benjamin gets pulled from her body. Now think of the cartoon when you were young where they pull a rabbit out of a hat and you go, there's no way that rabbit fit in that hat. I don't know how he fit inside of her because it did not look like he could ever go back inside because he was just so long and so big, and he had just been all curled and scrunched up in there. And I watched that and I was like, this is just the rawness, the simplicity, the beauty of understanding life and flesh and blood and breathing and air. And when I think of Jesus, the incarnation, God becoming flesh as a baby, my memory always goes to that time in the hospital where I watched Benjamin be removed from his mother, and to see the messiness and potentially the pain if you were to give birth naturally. And just that whole process. The creator of the world enters in his divinity and becomes human, becomes flesh, has bones and skin and senses and eyes and ears. And then John goes on and says, he dwells among us. It wasn't enough for him simply to be born. It wasn't enough simply for the creator to enter the world and understand the humanness of birth. But he dwells and he lives among us. The word dwelling in the Greek has a real sense of shelter, building. When I was looking at that word, the word camping came to mind. Being in the elements, being outside, and just having what you need to protect you. Not the luxuries, not the conveniences that many of us have today, but just the basic shelter of dwelling, living, existing. This past summer, I was at the Vetter campground, and it's one of the worst campgrounds I've ever been to in my life, and I knew that going there, but we wanted to go to Cultus Lake, and the campgrounds at Cultus Lake were full because it was last minute. So I said, we're going to bite the bullet, we're going to go to the Vetter campground, and they just slot you in. You've got 12 feet by about 30 feet. It doesn't matter how big your tent or trailer is, that's what you get. And we have a travel trailer, and I knew it was going to be tight, and so it took us about 15 minutes to maneuver into our slot. Then about another 10 or 15 minutes to get all set up, hoses and cords and jacks and blah, 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 all the stuff. Final thing, I had to plug in so we had electricity. It was going to rain all weekend. I wanted to be warm and dry. Brought the cord over, big post, big electrical. Everyone's got their stuff plugged into it. I walk up to it, and I'm 8 inches short. And I go back to where it comes out of my trailer. That's it. Come back out. Maybe it's changed. Still 8 inches short. Our entire dwelling for a weekend of rainy wet camping had to be moved 8 inches forward. So for the next 45 minutes, packing everything back in that was sticking out, getting my truck, hooking it up, moving it. I'm angry. My kids are getting frustrated because I'm a bear and I'm getting grumpy. And 45 minutes later, we moved our trailer 8 inches and I could plug it in. Sometimes living, is not easy. Whether it's camping or our own homes, life existing with shelter and warmth and heat can be difficult. Jesus comes in the flesh, and he dwells amongst us. He becomes human. He embraces and enters the messiness of life. Go back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 8. Talks about Adam and Eve walking in a garden with trees. Everything they need is there. Talks about them walking and talking with the Creator in the cool of the evening, of dwelling in the presence of God. And now we see the Creator coming on human terms and dwelling amongst the humans in that messiness and that difficulty and that uncertainty. John 1 verse 14 goes on, we have seen his glory. The Greek word doxa. And I don't know what you think of when you think of glory, majesty, splendor. I want to do a little poll with you to see what you think of when you think of glory. You're going to vote for number 1, number 2, or number 3. Okay, just by a show of fingers. I'm going to give you 3 options. Do you experience glory, the idea of majesty or splendor, best in which of these situations? Watching the sun rise or set, being on or near the ocean, walking through a nice, thick, old forest. I'll say them once again. Seeing the sun rise or set, being near or on the ocean, walking through a really beautiful forest. What would yours be? I want you to vote. Everyone vote. 1, 2, or 3. All right, good. Here's another one. A little bit different. Which of these settings would you feel like you're experiencing something of glory, majesty, splendor? Would it be at a musical concert? Would it be at a professional sporting event? Maybe a championship game? Or would it be, what would be my third one? Musical concert, sporting event, or a really well done play with a story, with acting? Where would you experience a sense of wonder or glory? You'd be overwhelmed or impressed. So the concert is number 1. A really high caliber, high charge sporting event, or a play that involves acting and story, maybe opera. What would it be? Lots of ones. Okay? Good. My last one has to do with people. Being in the presence of a person where you feel like, man, this is incredible. There's some majesty, some significance here. Would it be the Queen of England, President Obama, or Prime Minister Trudeau? The Queen of England, maybe you don't like any of my options. If you don't like any of my options, just hold up a big fist. The Queen of England, President Obama, or Prime Minister Trudeau? Would you feel a sense of majesty or splendor in their presence? I see some really strong fists. All right, very good. The idea of glory, of splendor and majesty, that comes to earth with the humanness of Jesus. We have seen his glory, God becoming flesh. The last two words are grace and truth. Grace and truth. And here's where we definitely come full circle. John 1:14 starts out with flesh and dwelling, very human characteristics. And then he moves towards glory, and now finally grace and truth. He's come full circle. He's come back to the divinity. How can a man represent grace and truth? Grace, that idea of unmerited favor. Truth. Pastor Jim talked about truth is what is old. Truth is what is constant. Truth is what has been with us since the beginning of creation. And if we go back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 9, there's two trees. Two. We always remember the second one, the tree of knowledge of good and evil that Adam and Eve disobey. But one is mentioned first, the tree of life. I want to suggest to you this morning that those are great examples of grace and truth. Because I think the tree of life represented creation, the world, humanity, the logos, the way it was meant to be, in its perfection, in its purity, in its beginning. The tree of life is that idea of one day things will be made right as they were at the beginning in the garden. And that tree of life is that reminder of grace, a life in which we are given favor and honor, whether we deserve it or not. And then the other tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the idea of truth. You have a choice. If this tree represents truth and the fruit on it, you can choose to obey me and experience the consequence of living in harmony and unity with your Creator. Or you can choose to disobey the truth that this tree represents, the command not to eat, and also experience the consequence, which would be separation from your Creator. And so we see this wonderful connection again of Jesus when he's described in his divinity. He was there at the beginning. It was always about him. And even though God reveals himself and shows himself to us through his human form, the divinity is always there. And there's that mystery of the two coming together. And even though we don't understand it, to know and accept it, just like we accept the light and heat from that candle, and we can't explain how that light travels, at least not very well. But we appreciate and we enjoy what it is and how it changes our life. Pastor Jim's going to come and help me here. And just as we go into a time of communion, historically in the church, the water and the juice from the vine, wine, were mixed together. And it represents a number of things. Not just the nature of who Jesus is, but it reminds us of his death on the cross when blood and water poured from his side. It reminds us of the early church in the book of Acts, where the believers become part of the church, his bride, and they become one with Jesus. And then finally, it reminds us of what is yet to come. We have been created, and we will be given something new. We will be given a new body, however that looks. 1 Corinthians 16 gives us a little bit of a glimpse, the resurrection of the body. But in every one of those, we are absorbed, we are grafted, we are brought into who Jesus is. And the cup always retains the color of the vine, that divinity, and reminds us that within this mystery, Even though both are poured, we cannot see them separately. And yet, there they are.